Hello, welcome to Steph's World according to Steph. Oh, you have to forgive me. It's been quite a weekend. Let's put it that way. I've been pretty busy researching other things not related necessarily to this, but in some ways, it might be. I believe that everything. It's kind of like a spider web. Notice what I'm wearing right now? Kind of like a spider web. There are tendrils that reach out, or pieces of that web that connect everything, everything in this universe. And I believe that. And I even think that it's taught in a lot of holy books that many religions also discuss. Maybe not in the same way, but it is discussed, and it is a topic that is very important. Now, before this is going to be part one, by the way, Spiritual Foundations, Chapter 30, Part 1, because it is going to be long, and when they're long like this, I don't like it to be like a whole hour. I really don't. People get tired of watching or listening to it. So, and I have something else that I want to talk about before we get started, back on Emmet again. Okay, now let's talk about when we were children. Okay? Now, some of you might have been the same age as me. I'm 59. But yet, some of you might be the age of my actual children were. One of them's a were. I still celebrate his birthday even though he's passed on, but I just can't help it. He was my child. And I had 34 years of that child. So it's kind of hard to not celebrate his little birthday, or not little, but his birthday, the celebration of his birth into this world. That's very important to me. And my children could tell you how important it was to me. I always made a big deal out of their birthdays every single year. Always. When they woke up in the morning, everything was done. And if it wasn't done then, it was done very, very quickly in the day for them. So that was my practice, and that was my belief, a celebration with their life. And so it was very difficult when my child passed on at such a very young age. But I understand, or at least, I understand the fact that he was called home, shall we say. That maybe in this life he did everything he was supposed to do. He learned everything he was supposed to learn for this life. And one of these days I'm going to get into that a little deeper, so that when I say these kind of things, you're going to understand a little better. Oh, that's what Steph meant. Okay? Okay, now what we're going to talk about today has to do with, before I get into Emmet, that is, has to do with shame and guilt. Okay? Believe it or not, unless you've had a lot of therapy and your therapist was really good about identifying these two big issues, they're called shame and guilt, that we carry in our souls, sometimes in our souls, not always, but at least we carry them in our mortal material lives. okay, until we learn that we actually have them. Now, I know it sounds confusing, but I'm going to use me as an example, okay? So many years ago, I had a lot of help by what I call my spiritual advisors, okay? And when I say a lot of help, I mean actual therapy, actual, let's look at Steph's life, you know, that kind of deal. And we did, in depth, we looked at it. And by doing that, I was able to see, oh, okay, that's why I feel that way about certain things. Okay, that's where all the anger came in at certain people for so long. And that anger was actually destroying me, okay? It was destroying my body. It was bringing terrible bad health to me. And it did. Now, there are two things that were the starters for all of this. Sorry about that. That's oh boy. And now, you know, sometimes it just goes and goes and goes. I think we all know what that is. That's my iPad. I probably need to shut it off. But anyway, so shame and guilt is a biggie, okay? Now, in my book that I'm in the process of writing, I actually get to it. I actually show the shame and guilt and how it came into my life at a very young age. Now let's look at a baby. When we give birth to a child, and you men don't give birth, but it's still your child, okay? And when you see that little baby, innocent baby, you don't think in your head right then that that baby is capable of anything bad, right? How could you? You see an innocent little child in your arms who is totally dependent upon you for everything. Food, changing of its diapers, cleansing them, love, that's a biggie. Holding them when they don't feel good, when they're hurt, that's part of love. Basically, completely dependent upon you, both of you, husband and wife, or girlfriend and boyfriend, whatever your situation may be. Okay, now, as the child gets older and becomes, say, a year and a half, they're already beginning to learn and experience life the way our lives are as we know it here and now. So this little baby is starting to experience it too. And one of the things that babies do, and you can read that in any psychology book, I've got one right over there as a matter of fact, and it'll tell you that in the very beginning, children, babies, mimic whoever it is that is raising them, because it could be an adoptive parent. But either way, they mimic that parent and some of what the parent does. Okay. Now they don't always mimic. Sometimes they do things that no, you can't even figure out where they figured that out or how they learned that. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you how they learned it. It's from their souls. That knowledge was in their little minds and souls when they were born. From the minute that they were conceived, that information was already there. In fact, there's so much information that you would be shocked if you actually knew, if you actually believed it. Watch your little children for a day. Just watch them. And then think about it. Okay, let's see. They're investigating, but they're doing certain things that you're not sure where they picked that up from. You don't know where they got it from because you didn't teach it to them, but someone did, or somewhere they got it. And usually they're never out of your sight, except for taking a nap maybe. So how in the world, maybe they go to a babysitter, so then maybe that's where they learned it. But what if they don't go to a babysitter? So then you ask yourself, how did they learn this? Now let's move on a little bit. Okay, now let's say, and I'm basing this on my own personal experience. Let's say that your child is, when they're watching, one of my grandchildren used to love Blue's Clues, okay? I mean, she loved it. That was her favorite show in the world. And, I mean, even when she was 6 and 7 months old, she loved Blue's Clues. I don't even know if it's still on today. We bought her videos. We always let her watch the regular shows. I mean, that was her favorite show. And for several years in her first part of life, she had Blue's Clues this and Blue's Clues that. And we always knew what to get her for her birthday and for Christmas and all of that because she loved Blue's Clues. Okay? Now, when she got a little older, we're talking about 2, I was capable of watching her for a while during the day because I was disabled and my daughter did not want to try and make me watch her child if it was going to make her mother sick, and that's me. I was a grandma. And she didn't want to make me more sick than what I already was. So she was careful. My daughter loved me and still does. So she was very careful about, taking care of her daughter, her firstborn. But when she was pregnant and she had another child, she needed help. And I wanted to help her because I am her mother. And I never imagined that I would be that disabled to not be able to pick my own granddaughter up when she was 1.5 years old because I couldn't. That was too heavy for me to pick up. Now, let me get on with the shame and guilt part. I knew by the time my firstborn granddaughter was born, I was beginning to understand the concepts of shame and guilt and the fact that we actually learned that when we were babies, when we were actually babies, okay? Now, I'm going to give you this example. I want you to think about it. When we're babies, do you not think that we feel all the things that an adult might feel even? That our sensuality is all there already? That we're actually born a sensual human being from the very beginning? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever seen your child doing things that appear to be very adult-like sensual activities. Think about it. And when you've seen that, did you try to stop your child from doing it? Did you indicate to your child that that was something bad or that we don't do? Because if you did, you know what you did when you did that? You introduced two things to that child: shame and guilt. Shame about what they were doing, that this must be a shameful thing, although they didn't understand those two words, but they did understand those feelings inside: shame and guilt. Terrible things. Terrible things. We are not born with those feelings. They are given to us by someone, and usually by the people that love us. Now here's the deal. Don't be upset because maybe you might have done that. Never be upset about it, because now that you know about it, maybe you won't do it again. Now that I knew about it when my granddaughter was only 2 years old, she did some things while she was watching her favorite show, Blue's Clues, one time. I was taking care of her, and she was sitting on some pillows, and all of a sudden I noticed that she was doing some things, this rocking back and forth thing. Only it wasn't just rocking back and forth. I could tell that there was more to it than that. Now, if I'd been my mother or my parents, I would have stopped her, and I would have said, "Dear, what you're doing is not right. You shouldn't be doing that right now." And I would have introduced shame and guilt into my granddaughter. Well, guess what? Even though I wanted to do that, because that's what I was taught, I didn't do it. I let my granddaughter do whatever it was that she felt she wanted to do. And I never once told her that what she was doing was wrong. Never. I never talked to her about it. I never brought it up. And I just kept my mouth shut and continued to take care of her without saying a word. Now, I don't know if my daughter and her husband introduced those concepts to her. I don't know. But I have a feeling that my daughter didn't. And I'll tell you why. Because at one point, I actually sat down with my daughter without the children around, and we talked about it. We actually discussed it. The concept of introducing shame and guilt to our children, and the fact that I probably did do that with both of my children that I raised. Now, my other child I partially raised. I didn't have time to give those bad things to him. But unfortunately, the people that he went to stay with might have done it. Because when he grew up and he was back in our lives again, I noticed that he had those kind of issues very deeply. And there was nothing I could do about it at that point. He needed big time help. And being his real mother, I was not qualified to try to help my son. There was no way I could. But I did bring one of my spiritual advisors into his life, and she, in turn, helped him tremendously. Okay, thank you. Now that's my reminder to get started on Emmet, but I brought all this up for a reason. Now, it might even be in Emmet Fox's stuff that we're going to read later on, okay? But these two things that I think are so horrible, shame and guilt, play a part in our lives all throughout our lives. And if you think about it, think about your life and think about some of the things that you've done that you weren't even sure why you did those things. What prompted you to make you feel like something was shameful and you had to point that out, or you had to stop it somehow, or you were feeling guilty over what? Maybe in a relationship that you were in, and suddenly you were feeling some guilt over continuing in that physical part of the relationship. Think about it. Think about if you've ever felt that, because if you have, I guarantee you learned those things when you were a child. Now, being an adult, you must learn to get rid of them. You truly must. You must learn not to feel shame and guilt for anything unless you do something that really is something worth feeling guilty over. And even then, God still loves you. No matter what, God loves you. And if that does happen, do your forgiveness routine that I gave you. There are 4 steps to learning how to forgive yourself and others. And I will go into that again. I promise. Now, let's get into Emmet. This is where I left off, okay? And that I got 22 minutes. I'm probably going to go another 10, 15 minutes, okay? Now, this is where I left off, and he says, the most mischievous thing in life is man's slowness. Indeed, we can say his reluctance to perceive his own dominion. God has given us dominion over all things, but we shrink like frightened children from assuming it, although that assuming is the one and only escape for us. You know, I want to just say one thing about this. If we shrink from assuming that, why do you suppose we shrink from it? Could shame and guilt be any part of this? Seriously, I want you to think about it. See, those are 2 items in, I don't know what to call them. Their feelings are what they are. Nothing more, just feelings. And extracting them will change your life. I guarantee you. Okay, now, mankind is often like a fugitive who sits in the driving seat of an automobile, which is all ready to bear him away to safety, but who cannot bring himself for nervousness to grasp the controls and start the car. He sits there half frozen with terror, whether his pursuers will catch up with him and what will happen to him if they do. He could make his escape into safety at any moment, but he will not or dare not. Okay. Now, Emmet may have a different idea about this, but here's what I believe, totally and completely. A lot of what's behind this is our own shame and guilt. We are afraid to move on to understand that there is no limitation in this world, only the limitation that we put into it, that we put on it. That's the only limitation that we put into it, that we set. So one of the things that makes us set that is shame and guilt. So as soon as you extract those feelings that have been deep down inside of you from the time that you were probably a year and a half old, because you weren't born with them, trust me. You were a happy little baby until you learned about shame and guilt. And then you cry. And you're still crying. Okay, now, Jesus, who knew the human heart as no other has ever known it before or since, understood our difficulty and our weakness in this respect. And with his unparalleled magic of living words, his power of putting fundamental truth in such simple, direct, and pointed fashion that even a child could not miss it, commands us. Now here's what Jesus said. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. It is impossible to imagine the thing being stated more definitely and compelling than these words. There are simply no words in any language which could be clearer or more emphatic. And yet, for the most part, Christians can quietly ignore them or else discount them. Their meaning until they are left without any meaning at all. No meaning at all. I want you to think about this. These are some amazing things that we have been given. We, human beings, have been given these words, which are much more than words, they're actions. Now, how often do we actually do it? And I want to explain something here. Asking for a new car is not what we're talking about here. Okay? Let's remember that. Big difference, okay? There's a certain thing, certain kind of asking that we're talking about, and it isn't a new car. Got that? Okay. Now, as I have previously pointed out, we are obliged to believe that either that Jesus meant what he said, or that he did not. And as we can hardly believe that he did not, or that he could talk nonsense through want of understanding, come on, we know that didn't happen, we are compelled to accept these words as being true. And indeed, where is there room for evasion? Ask, and ye shall receive. Is not this the Magna Charta? Now pay attention here. Magna Charta of personal freedom for every man, woman, and child on earth. Is not this the decree of the emancipation of the slaves of every kind of bondage, physical, mental, and spiritual. What room does this leave for the so-called Christian? Virtue of resignation so often preached. The fact is, of course, that resignation is not a virtue at all. Not at all. On the contrary, resignation is a sin. And I agree with that. It's a sin to resign yourself not to do something for whatever reason. Now, my thinking is, asking ye shall receive. You don't ask because you don't think you're worthy. You don't think you're worthy to ask and receive. When you don't think you're worthy, where do you think that comes from? It comes from something deep inside of you. It comes from feeling shame and guilt about yourself. So if you feel shame and guilt about yourself, then you probably feel that you are not worthy of love, of any love. That would explain a lot about human beings and how and why they react in a lot of the ways that they react in a relationship, in their spiritual world, in every bit of it. Really, I want you to think about this seriously. Now, this is what Emmet continues to say. What we commonly dignify with the fine name of resignation is really an unwholesome mixture of cowardice and sloth, laziness, okay, and cowardice. So we're not brave. That's what he's saying. But we're not brave for a reason. And that's what I say. And a lot of other people who are very spiritual, who woke me up, who took me out of my prison. Because let me tell you something. Those things, those feelings have imprisoned you for your whole life. And you don't even realize it. And there's a simple way to get rid of them. You can't just say, ask God to remove them. Or you could. You can ask God. But there's a little more to it. Because you have to remember something. Those two things have played a severe part in every single thing you've done in all of your whole life. So you must take a look at every part of your life and figure out where those two things came into your life when you did things. So, in other words, the easiest way to do it is to do an inventory of your life. And you know what an inventory is. So that is the easiest way to look at your life and figure out when and where those two things came into it. And then, when you see that in your past, in your life, when you can go as far back in your memories as you can go, and you take this inventory, and you find somebody that you trust to help you look at this inventory and see what you must ask God to remove and why. You also must look at it and see how that played into your life later on. The things that you did as an adult. Okay? And you must be ready to forgive. And by forgive, we mean to let go completely. Completely. To forgive yourself. To forgive your parents. To forgive whoever. Sorry about this. Whoever you have blamed. Blame is a terrible thing, by the way. But we do it. As human beings, that's something else we've learned to do. Blame. That came later. Okay, I'm going to finish up here because we're only got about 4 minutes. So he says that we have no business to be resigned to inharmony now, of any kind, because inharmony cannot be the will of God for us. The will of God. We have no business to accept ill health or poverty or sinfulness or strife or unhappiness or remorse with resignation. We cannot be resigned to accept all of these things. We cannot say to ourselves, well, I deserve them. No, you don't deserve them. What you deserve is the opposite of them. But first, you must love yourself. And by loving yourself, you open it up to let God love you. Even though you think all these years that you've been doing that, you probably haven't been. So the last thing I'm going to read here is that we have no right to accept anything less than freedom and harmony and joy. For only these things do we glorify God and express His holy will, which is our raison d'etre. Okay, I know what it means. It means it's our reason for existing. Okay? Our reason for existing. And the last thing I'm going to say in this is, he says, it is our most sacred duty out of loyalty to God Himself to refuse to accept anything less than all-round happiness and success, and we shall not be following out the wishes and instructions of Jesus if we do accept less. We are to pray and meditate and reorganize our lives in accordance with His teaching continuously and entirely until our goal is attained. I'm going to stop right there because part 2, we are going to continue with this. We're not going to stop. So I want to thank you all. I love you. I really do. And I want you to think about what has been said in this. It is long, but it was worth it. I love y'all, and I'll talk to you very soon because we need to get to part 2 on this. Love you all. Bye for now.